Recording. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about.
I'm curious about.
I'm curious about.
I'm curious about building open, authentic, loving relationships.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about BDSM.
Can I break up with my partner and still be
How
friends?
can I become more involved in the BDSM
How do you know when you're
community?
too busy to have multiple romantic relationships?
What would it be like bringing up children with my best friend?
Hi, I'm Effy Blue, and this is the Curious Fox podcast. Curious Fox is a community for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. We're based out of Brooklyn, New York, where we have been hosting monthly socials for the last 3 years. At our socials, we pick a theme grounded in love, sex, and relationships, and explore the theme through personal stories. This month, we tackled relationship transitions. From monogamy to open relationships, from hierarchical poly to a non-hierarchical structure, transitions come in all shapes and sizes. Do you wonder if you can navigate a conscious uncoupling, go from being in a romantic relationship to a friendship? Are you in a long-distance open relationship and now thinking about cohabiting? People change, relationships change. How can you navigate through those changes in a way that honors everyone involved? Each month, a new set of panelists, diverse in identity and experience, share their stories and bravely answer questions from the audience. For a long time, we kept what was happening in the room. However, we continuously got requests to record a discussion for those who couldn't be there. Respecting the privacy of the panelists and the guests has always been important to us. We thought a lot about how to document the room while maintaining the awesome vibe that enables people to share so vulnerably. After a lot of pondering, we decided an audio-only recording of the evening with opportunities for guests to ask questions anonymously provided a solution for this challenge. So here we are. This is episode 1 of the Curious Fox podcast. I could not be more proud of our first attempt. The discussion was lively and intimate, and I'm grateful for the panelists who bravely share their stories with us. Everyone was engaged, and we had great questions and some enlightening answers. I really hope you enjoyed the first installment of the Curious Fox podcast. At the end of the episode, we'll share with you how you can be more involved in the podcast and the community. Happy listening. Good evening, everyone. We are going to start. Before we start, I love doing this. I'm always interested in who's new, who's been here before. Can I have a show of hands who are like regular foxes, people who've been coming more than 5 times? Yeah, we have some in the room. We have an awesome core community of foxes that come regularly. Who's brand new, first time ever, just walked in, might not be sure where they are? Okay. Anybody not sure where they are? Okay, good. Okay, good. Okay. Again, just before we start, I want to say we are recording it for a podcast. So we are recording everything that happens in the room, audio only for a podcast. This is our big project for 2019. Curious Fox socials have been happening for 2.5 years. Here for the last year, and then before that we were meeting at another spot in Brooklyn. And we got so much feedback from people who couldn't be in the room. So after the event, we normally write these cool reports called the Fox Notes, and we blast them out to our mailing list. And we had so many people saying, I wish I could be there. Like, I want to, do you ever record these things? And we didn't do it for a long time for various reasons. And then we, at some point, were just like, okay, we need to do this for people. We have some awesome people who are volunteering their time right now. And we just want to be really respectful of people's privacy. So we also want your participation. This is all about you. Curious Fox is about curiosity. We tell people no promises, no pressure, just curiosity. We invite you with your curiosity, hence even your label says, what are you curious about? And our panel are going to share their stories with you, and then we're going to open it up to questions. We're going to have like an hour of Q&A. If you don't want your voice, we don't want you to be, we do want your questions. If you don't want your voice heard, there are index cards and some pencils and pens around. You can write your questions and she can read them out and we'll answer them. That's kind of how we're getting about this privacy business. Thank you for your support and understanding. So there's a lot of new faces, so I'm going to give you a quick run of the format. It's very fluid. Today we are going to talk about relationship transitions. So every month we pick a theme anchored in love, sex, and relationships, and we explore this through different voices. We work really hard to put together a diverse panel in experience and in story, as well as identity. And we explored the theme from a very sort of human, everyday, how are the individuals are doing it in their everyday lives kind of tone. We'll start with sort of going down the panel. Everyone's going to share their story with you and their transitional relationship transition story or personal transition story. We are gonna just ask them questions and get a more of an insight into what was working, what was good, how they grew, and all those nice juicy things. And then we're gonna wrap it up in about an hour and a bit. So happens every time, so I'll let you know. People sort of hold their questions back because they're shy, and then we, at the end we have like quick rounds, right? Don't be shy, bring your curiosity, ask all the questions. The panelists are awesome. They've been told if they don't want to answer anything, they'll just pass. Be shy, ask. There are no bad questions. We'll manage it. You don't have to worry about anything. Everybody clear? Everybody happy? Awesome. Yes. I will do my introductions last because I've just been talking. I want to start the panel off from that direction. Is that okay? And they're gonna just go through and tell you who they are and why they're here and their story.
Hi, everyone. Hello. I love hearing you refer to everyone as foxes. My name is Alex. I am 32 years old. My pronouns are she, her. So I am here today with my fiance, Ryan, who is next to me. I engaged with the poly world initially about 5 or 6 years ago through the kink world. I was in a relationship with someone who is part of a kink dynamic, and he was in a hierarchical relationship that was open, non-monogamous. And I was told that if I wanted to find more resources about BDSM, I should explore the poly community because there's a lot of overlap. I did that by going to some community events around New York City, primarily Poly Cocktails, which if you haven't attended, it's a monthly get-together for people in the community. I sort of picked it up and then eventually put it down. I found that especially being new to the kink world, I wanted the sense of security that I could get from a monogamous dynamic. And then several years later, after I'd been exploring kink for a period of time, I met my now fiance, Ryan. So I guess that was probably about 2 years ago. Yeah. Throughout that, I think I tried dating several people who, first of all, were like strictly monogamous and like maybe were kinksters, but like really into spanking, which was not my thing. And I would like try to make it work, but I found that our ethos did not line up. Like I found that when I talked to other people who were either open to poly or had been in poly non-monogamous relationships, I was really drawn to their sense of transparency and self-awareness. Many relationships crashed and burned. Ryan and I met each other, and maybe like on our third date, the topic of monogamy came up. And we both found that we had very, very similar feelings and ideals, which was in the long term for us, monogamy was not sustainable, nor was it ideal. I think that I wanted to be in a relationship with someone who trusted me enough to sort of like welcome my curiosity and sort of the idea that, they didn't own me or my desire. So we both agreed that, it felt like our relationship was going to be serious. And eventually we might open up the relationship when it felt like it was appropriate. And essentially that's what happened. A little under a year ago, we were in a really good place. And Ryan was interested in exploring kink a little bit more. He was a little bit newer to the scene, and I wanted him to have that opportunity. Also, I was just super busy, which like you would be surprised how much of non-monogamy is about logistics and like convenience. Like I had so many meetings. So we started inching our way into non-monogamy, and it took several, oh gosh, I'm just chatting. I'm going to wrap this up here in a second. First, it was, well, it's just kink. It's just other people in the kink community. And then, we got on OkCupid and met people who were not part of the kink community, but interested in it. And so it was like, oh, well, then it's just sex. And then I met someone who I developed feelings for, and it was like, oh, well, it's like a light relationship. And then initially, and then it sort of progressed from there. And there were definitely a lot of really difficult conversations that happened because it like, I say that now like, well, and then this happened and then we transitioned, but it was more like I did something and fucked up. And we were like, oh, you're emotionally involved. Like we need to talk about this now. And so it's been a really interesting journey, and I'm just gonna sort of wrap up there for now.
Thank you.
Appreciate you leaving some of the story for me to tell. It's nice. It's nice of you.
Very curious to hear how you tell it.
Yeah. My name is Ryan. I use he, him pronouns. About a little over 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I was getting out of a long monogamous relationship that ended up being kind of sexless and depressing by the end. And when I got out of it, I realized this was my last opportunity to explore some of the things I wanted to explore, but it had yet mustered the courage to investigate before things started to sag. They haven't yet, I swear. This is the good version. You know, you're getting me at really the peak. So, save your judgments, please. So I went on some internet dating sites selecting for people who had a little bit of bend in their straw, and I met my now fiance. You know, on the third date, we did agree that we had deep skepticism about the long-term viability of monogamy. I think we'd both been in relationships that just ended up not working because we didn't feel accepted or some of our needs weren't being met or a combination thereof. And then we shelved that for a while. And then about 9 months ago, we decided to open up, and we made some really interesting, and by interesting, I mean ignorant decisions. One of which was the first thing we did was started behaving as if we were single but had someone we had to tell about everything we did. Right? So I immediately went out into the world and was like, who wants to fuck? And and you know, stop me if I'm telling part of your story wrong. My beautiful, loving, wonderful fiance went out into the world and immediately found a deep and potentially dysfunctional romantic entanglement. and you know, accurate. And you know, so like the first time I had sex with someone who wasn't my fiance, especially because kink has a bit more emotional baggage for many people. It's not true for everyone, but you know, especially for me as I was exploring. You know, that caused a lot of pain and discomfort. And then when we realized that Alex was becoming romantically involved with another person, that required a lot of sort of tiptoeing around landmines. Well, more stepping on landmines, but so we, through a lot of pain and suffering in that relationship, we discovered we were doing something that we, between ourselves, been referring to as non-consensual poly. And the way we understand this term is that we're following the rules we agreed upon, so the pain and suffering is irrelevant. And that, I think, is the big lesson we learned, is that regardless of whether we think we're doing everything right, we have to be present for how our experiences feel and the lived experience of what our polydynamic is like. Because when we're not, we just end up being resentful and angry and in pain, while occasionally going on dates that we then feel we have to hide from one another. I mean, it becomes painful in ways that are destructive. And so we took a step back, figured out what we were doing wrong. I went on to have a brief but intense romantic entanglement with someone else, and we decided that we would slow down the pacing and increase the communication. And I think that really helped us feel less shitty about everything. We did have some moments of like, is poly right for us? And we're here, so you know how that decision turned out. And that brings us to where we sit now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Cool.
Hi, my name is G. Pronouns are she, her. And I thought I would come in today to talk about my conscious uncoupling, and then realized I can't do that without telling a whole lot more of the story. So I, at 20 years old, got into a relationship that ended up being monogamous for 11 years. We got married partway through that and moved to New York. And my partner, who I'll call C, now ex-partner, he decided he wanted to leave New York. And so we had this choice point of what was going to happen. I wanted to stay here, he wanted to leave, but it was going to be 9 months off in the future. So our relationship was not going well. And we realized for both of us it was best to end it, but not right away. And so in that, I decided to ask about opening up our relationship as a way to get to know myself while our relationship was in decay. And he agreed. We had nothing left to lose at that point because the relationship was already dying. And so we had a lot of beautiful, open, honest conversations and took the leap to opening up. And as we became non-monogamous, we also fell back in love in that process. He found his love again for me. And as we were coming back together, I proposed closing the relationship again. We're like, no, this is giving us so much. Let's keep it open and see where it goes. We didn't really know what we each wanted at the beginning. And of course, that's always shifting. But realized that theoretically and personally, non-monogamy made so much sense to us and that we were each interested in deeper emotional relationships. I also enjoy a lot of, random makeouts here and there, and he didn't care to hear about them. So we learned communication as well in terms of what each of us is interested in knowing about the other. But he was so supportive in my developing deep relationships and sharing those troubles with him. At first I was hiding all of oh, I'm so invested in this other thing. It's scary for him to know. But no, he actually felt more connected to me when I shared what was going on for me. So we became open, we became polyamorous. I developed some long-term partnerships, one of which is still around this many years later. We opened up 4 years ago. And about a year after that, Seed decided he no longer wanted to live together, but we still wanted to be romantic partners. So that was a big disentanglement for us, no longer having our dogs together, no longer sharing space together. After being together for 12 years at that point, it was heartbreaking. It was so hard. But we supported each other in it and continued to want to be connected even as the form was shifting. So about less than a year after we stopped living together, C no longer wanted to be romantic partners or married. And that was a little over a year ago, or 2 years ago now, 2 years. And it was heartbreaking, but again, because we had been doing this step by step and with so much love and connection and openness for each other, we're able to continue our connection. So the divorce process took a while for some legal reasons and just delaying a thing that I didn't want, but then realized I did actually want. When he asked at one point, do you actually want to be married? I'm like, no, I really don't. So even though I resisted because I felt pushed into it, it was actually my decision as well. And the divorce became final last Friday. So, yeah, thank you. And then we had a 2-hour phone call on Sunday talking about our relationships and our pain, and he sent me the poems he wrote about our divorce, and I shared with him that I was crying with a lover for a whole long time on Saturday, processing the grief of the younger me whose dreams are no longer, but realizing that is the younger me. That's not present me, doesn't actually want that. So, yeah, thank you. So now I would consider myself solo poly. He would say the same for him. I have several beautiful, deep partnerships, one for 3.5 years, another for 2 years. Another relationship transition would be going from what I would say French vanilla, not quite vanilla, to very kinky. So thank you, non-monogamy, for that. And just really valuing having an uncoupling be so beautiful and connected, and where we still consider each other family and deep support systems for each other.
Thank you, Z. Thanks. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Hi, folks. First of all, I want to say thanks to Ryan for saying fuck. I was like, can I say fuck up here? Ice has been broken, so filthy mouth, get ready for it. Okay, so my name's Siobhan. On Grindr, my pronouns are listed as boy, girl, etc. I don't care what you call me as long as you call me. I was introduced to poly back in 2014. I would say it wasn't peak hoe phase, but the whole phase was on a downward turn. And I'd been in this baby fever mode. I'm ready to settle down. I want to have kids. I need to find somebody to make a life with because I don't want to be running after a toddler in my 50s. But I was in a bar in New York at a Gay Geeks event. GGNY is fantastic. Shameless plug. 2:00 in the morning, these two gorgeous men walk in. And I'm just, I'm bad at video games, but I like to hang out. So I'm just dancing, having fun by myself, listening to Lady Gaga or whatever's playing. And I wound up making out with one of these guys. And then I wound up making out with the other guy. And it didn't start a fight. And I'm like, oh, this is different. Like, you know, I'd been compulsory monogamous my entire life. Like I'd heard the word polyamory, but it existed in much in the same way that, like, you know, Greek democracy exists. Like it was some lofty idea I'd heard of. Compressed story, like we decided like we liked each other. They were already dating. And we did the long distance thing for 9 months. And because they were already seeing other people, that allowed me to see other people during that month, you know, so that I didn't have to be alone. And then come September of the same year, I went to visit for 2 weeks and wound up staying for 3.5 years. One of the things, like, you know, towards the middle of the relationship that we all said, oh, like if we'd known then what we know now, something we would have done differently, was like, you know, it was really impromptu and like, it was a flippant decision for me to stay. Like I went to Ohio with 2 weeks worth of clothes, and I only had 2 weeks worth of clothes for like my first 6 months there because I hadn't been back to New York yet. I'm from a military family. I'm used to moving around a lot. So like uprooting my entire life and moving to a new state wasn't scary for me. What was scary for me was, for the first time in my life, like the only other people who gave a shit about me were 400 miles away. And so like very early on, I'm like, so which of you wants to be my emergency contact? Because like right now, if I get hit by a bus, they're calling my mom and she can't get here nearly as quickly as you can. And, you know, they knew that they were uprooting me from my life in New York. You know, I have a background in theater and culinary arts, and they're like, there's not much opportunity for that here, but we make good money. We'll take care of you. And so like arranging, you know, bank accounts and whatnot, and, you know, again, emergency contacts, and, you know, just figuring out the logistics of how we make the three of us a unit, especially in a universe that only recognizes a couple, especially in a universe where you two have already been recognized as a couple for, I think it was 5 years at the time. And then, you know, this frilly, bouncy, bubbly black bitch just shows up like, hi, I'm part of the group now. Like, literally, my first Thanksgiving in Ohio, we'll call him John, did not tell his family I was coming. Didn't tell them I was coming, didn't tell them who I was. I just showed up like some college kid who doesn't have a home to go to. Luckily, like, I don't, like, everyone took it very well. They didn't ask too many questions. Like, I was like, look, you didn't ask me to lie. I'm not gonna lie. If anybody asks me who I am, I'm gonna tell them who I am. And like, you know, I'm kikiing with the cousins and like the under 30 crowd at the Thanksgiving, and like, you know, by the end of the night, I'm like, oh yeah, you know, your cousin has seen my insides. Like, you know, we've been balls deep inside each other. I love that man. Like, I love him with all my heart. And like, and so like, you know, I mean, we still kiki, like we're no longer together, and I still kiki with his family on occasion. Conversely, you know, we'll call him Mike. Yeah, Mike. I didn't meet Mike's family. I was in Ohio for like 2 years before I was officially introduced. It took going to LA for me to meet his mother. And family has always been really important to me. So I was like, look, you know, she doesn't have to love me, but she has to know I exist. Like, you know, like we have to be at least cordial, because if you expect me to be around for the rest of your life, like, I'm not gonna hide from your mother. That's not who I am. That's not who I was raised to be. And if you're ashamed of me, then I ain't got time for this anyway. That was a bit of a low blow, because like I knew he wasn't ashamed of me, and like, you know, it's not fair to kick a dog while he's down. And like I was hitting him where he hurts, but like I was hurting because I was like, yo, like I mean, John did it wrong, but I met his family in the first 2 months I was here. What do you mean you haven't told, you haven't told your father about me and your mother only knows my name? The first time I spoke to his mother, he just unceremoniously threw the phone at me. And I'm like, hi, ma'am, how, I'm like, and I couldn't give him shit about it because I asked for this. So I'm trying to make small talk with a woman that I've never met. But that was one of the biggest leaps for us. And because I was only supposed to be there for 2 weeks and we didn't have any of these conversations, we were really just learning as we go and damage control. And then to add to the situation, they were leaders of the local poly organization. So I went from having never been poly, having only supposed to been in this town for 2 weeks, to being the face of polyamory for Southern Ohio. And I'm it's okay, well, damn, black, queer, pescatarian, how many slashes do I want to add to my name? But I said, I want to do this community justice, and I certainly don't want to lie to these college students about what polyamory is, what polyamory is supposed to be, what polyamory is supposed to look like. So I dived in head first, and I was all over Tumblr, and I was reading books, and I was new to polyamory, but I've always been a people person. I've always been in the theater. I'm accustomed to diving into the minds of unfamiliar characters, and so I took all that with me, and a number of relationships. It was well, y'all seem to be making poly work really well. Can you help me with our relationship? And there were times in those 3.5 years where I'm when we're at home, we don't speak. It's just that my grandmother raised me that the nonsense you're going through at home stays at home. And especially the only poly faces I wasn't going to be the reason that someone said, well, no, obviously poly doesn't work. The one poly throuple we know, they're in shambles. So, it was about, for a while it was about, saving face and, presenting well until things did get better again. At the end of 3.5 years, it turned out we wanted different things. What I will say to their credit is that for the majority of our relationship, we were very open about our feelings. They called themselves relationship anarchists. Personally, and maybe this is my own saltiness talking. I'm no, you're kind of hierarchical. You just what you call yourself and what you practice aren't necessarily the same thing. But as people who were relationship anarchists in theory, we attempted to allow our relationship to be what it needed to be in any given moment. And we were constantly reevaluating what our needs were, the shape our relationship was taking. And as new people came and went from our relationship, we allowed room for that change. But by the end of our journey together, I've always had a very firm idea of what I want in my head. My end goal is solid. I can see it. It's the road there that I don't know. And that's why I allow the universe to say, hey, move to Ohio with these boys you barely know, and, see what happens. But from my perspective, they're on very specific paths, but they lack a vision for where they want to go. And that became very frustrating for me. I'm if you don't want kids, that's fine. Let me know so I can make a decision. If you want to spend the rest of your life here, that's fine. Let me know so that I can make a decision. And every time it was time to make a decision, they would kick the can down the road. Another year, another 2 years. Okay, we're going to buy this house. Oh, are we staying here? No, we're going to buy this house. We're going to live here for 5 years, and then we'll decide if we want to stay here. And that's fine for them, but that didn't work for me. And eventually, it felt, from my perspective, that I was the one who was always compromising. And that may or may not have been true, but when you feel like you're the one who's always compromising, that leads to resentment. And to this day, I love them. I don't want to hate them. So I said, in order to prevent me from resenting you, I have to walk away from this. And then there was the whole transition of decoupling all those things we set up over 3.5 years. You know, me no longer having access to his bank account, me finding a place to move out. I mean, they weren't kicking me out, but you're moving into a house, you're you know, making a life in this new home. I don't want to set up shop in this house and then, you know, move out in 3 months. That's not, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's not fair to you. As far as they were concerned, well, you moved here to be with us. It'd be unfair for us to just be like, all right, bye. So like, we were all very fair about, you know, the decoupling situation. But for me, I was like, okay, I need to be out of here by the time you move into your new house so that you don't have to deal with, you know, moving my stuff twice or whatever. And I wound up moving into a place with some friends on the other side of town for the summer before moving back to New York just after my 30th birthday. My farewell to Athens, Ohio was going to Vegas to see my idol, Mariah Carey, and I didn't cry about anything actually at the concert, the only thing I sobbed about was how beautiful she was and how close I was to the stage. Nothing else existed in that moment. That's my permanent Facebook profile picture. And so when I came back from Vegas, biggest mistake I ever made, I told my mother that we broke up. Because I was like, you know what? I'm 30 now. I'm going to tough it out. You know, if I got to find some shit job here and save up my money and then move back to New York or move to Indiana with my other partner or move to Atlanta, I have some partners there, whatever I have to do, I'm going to figure this out on my own. My mother heard, what, y'all broke up? Oh, so what are you doing? You don't live with them anymore? Oh, you're coming home. She's like, you're coming home. I can be there next week. And I'm like, nah, Mom, I already paid for the ticket to Vegas from Ohio. Let me do Vegas first, and we'll figure that out when I get back. And yeah, as soon as I got back from Vegas, my mom was like, so your stuff's packed, right? Because it's time to go. And so now I'm back in New York because Mommy came and rescued me.
Yeah. Welcome back. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, hi. I am Alan, 30, hetero male, so male pronouns. And my story is, oddly not dissimilar to G's, which is funny because I think we met about 4 years ago around the time frame that you discussed. So let's try and get through this without going through too many detours. I met my best friend when I was in 5th grade. We started becoming closer friends in 8th grade and started dating around the senior year of high school. Cut to end of senior year, or halfway through senior year of college, we got engaged. We were living in New Jersey. We were already kind of living together during the summers and winter breaks, but I was only going to school about an hour away from where she lived, or where we lived. Anyway, we got married. So I was 22 at the time, and we lived together in New Jersey on our own for a couple of years. And kind of realized that suburban Jersey life was not for us. We started looking at homes in New York, and at that point, she wanted to live in a cooperative living space. So we started looking at those. And I don't know if any of you have ever lived in one, but it's kind of tough to find a place to live as a couple in cooperative situations. So some of the places that we came across were where we kind of got our first introduction to polyamory as a concept. We ended up moving into our own space with some other roommates and shifting to another space shortly after that. But the concept of, non-monogamy stayed as a kind of underlying current in our lives for a couple of years. Then she started to feel like she wanted to get out of New York. And one summer she went to work on a farm in Vermont for the summer. within a week of her going up there, I ended up hanging out at Union Pool, which I did not realize had a reputation, but I ended up making out with somebody at the bar.
Now everybody knows.
Yeah. So when I saw her again in person, we talked about it. And the question was, well, did you enjoy this? Is this, a friend of ours had said, don't tell her if it's not something you are going to do again. I told her, not specifically because I was going to, but because I enjoyed it. So that started that kickstarted finally after years of talking about it, the process of opening up. We stuck around New York for a couple more years. She continued going back to this farm in Vermont for the summers. We eventually moved out of town and up to Maine in our own space. And we lived there for about a year and a half, just us. Kind of first time living alone together. And then we realized that was not the right place for us. So we came back to New York and ended up in a community house with a bunch of roommates. She decided to head back up to Vermont this one past summer. She was actually asked to go back up there by the owners of the farm. I kind of had a moment when she was up there and I was living in this community home that I never really wanted to live in a big community. And, over the years, there had been a lot of just kind of growth and understanding that we were different. We're different people. We want different things. We love each other very much. She's, my best friend. But I kind of had that realization that I need to move out of this place and not have roommates. Us living together when it was in Maine was fine, but it just, none of it quite felt right. And, layer onto this the fact that we realized at some point that we had drastically different libidos. So at some point this summer, we had a long, drawn-out conversation. I remember I was sitting on the west side, Riverside Park, whatever it's called, near 23rd Street, and talked for like an hour and realized that I should find my own place to live, and she was going to stay up on this farm for the foreseeable future. So where we're at now is we're best friends. We're still legally married. There's no reason to change that, at least for there's no reason to change that right now. But I am living on my own here in the city. She is living up on this farm in her community that she's built and grown over the last couple of years. We see each other, a couple of times a month, maybe. In the winter, she comes down here to be somewhere warm. This past weekend, she called me on Friday. She's like, I need to come down this weekend. I can't do anything. It's too cold. I'm like, yeah, come on down. So, we hang out. It's pretty platonic at this point. But we enjoy each other's company. I'm now dating as solo poly, I guess is the most succinct way to put it. Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Awesome stories. I have so many questions. Before I start my questions, I do want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the shares. This is awesome stories and this is intimate and gorgeous, and thank you. So I'll give you a short synopsis of who I am because I do this all the time, so I'd like to give little snippets every time. My name is Effy. I'm a relationship coach. I work with people who are curious about transitioning into or have hit a roadblock in open relationships, non-monogamy, polyamory, whatever they are trying to tackle. I coach around this idea of relationship by design. I think regardless of what our end design is, we should actively and consciously design our relationships in a way that we can thrive in them. And thriving looks different for different people. So a good place to start is to figure out what thriving looks like for you. And looks like for your partner or partners, and then design the rest of it around that idea. Personally, I go by she, her pronouns. I practice what people call, and I lovingly call, kitchen table poly, meaning I have multiple loving partners, and every now and then we can sit around a table, break bread, hang out, share what's going on. And everyone's sort of very loving and caring for one another. I actually have a recent transition in my life. For a long time, my living situation was My partner and his wife lived on the first floor of the building that we live in. I lived on the second floor on my own, and on the third floor were our friends for a long time. So we lived in this building together with separate apartments. And it's an interesting relationship. That partner and I have been dating for 4 years. His wife and I are not romantically involved, but very close as people, as friends. I consider her to be an ally, a friend, a fellow strong woman. She's, I have a lot of love and respect for her, and it's mutual. It's that to me, actually, out of all the relationships I have in my life, that is the one that is the most interesting and different dynamic. It's not something that you see very often. In fact, you get told it should be the other way around. Like if you love the same person, especially as a woman, if you love the same person, you should be fighting. And we don't. We're very loving one another. So this was like this for a long time. He and I were dating for 4 years. They were together for 5 years. They got married 2 years ago. I was actually in their wedding as their best man. It was awesome. And then I moved into the second floor maybe 2 years ago. And then about 2 months ago, my other partner, my life partner, moved in with me. That's a big transition because I love living on my own. In fact, the only way that the closest that I would ever come to living with somebody else was on the second floor of the building, but in the last sort of officially the last since November, my partner moved in with me, thus with us, and we're just in the sort of transitioning into cohabiting, also looking at what that relationship looks like now for the four of us. My partner downstairs and I have a what I call a legacy relationship, right? It's what I brought into this newer relationship, which is about over a year old. So that is interesting because then sort of I come with this other relationship, and it's been really interesting to see that legacy relationship transition into now accommodating for this other person that I deeply love, and to see that the relationship between my partner from downstairs and my roommate partner get close with one another and sort of really build that relationship. That's really interesting. And then also just in our relationship, so my roommate partner is like being roommates, right? Transitioning from dating, love, future planning, seeing what we want in life, to now like living under the same roof, which is very, very different. Especially, we have different ways that we think about living and basic like cleanliness, that kind of stuff, also like tidiness, all the roommate stuff. And then how do we keep this relationship? How do we sort of separate the relationship from the roommate stuff, right? And how do we manage that transition and not let, the dishes in the sink be the thing that splits us up, because it's just not, that's not what it's about, right? When you're living together, you sometimes lose sight of that. And then ultimately, like, the dishes in the sink is not really that important, right? But you have to manage that transition into co-living, which can be different. So that's really sort of a little snippet of what goes on with me. But this is not about me. This is about my awesome panel and you guys. So I want to open the floor up to questions. I have a bunch, so if nobody has one, I'll start off. But I encourage you to get your questions in early and upfront. So any questions? Again, so if you are okay to talk, just put your hand up and you'll get a mic. If you want a card to write your question on, put your fist up and you'll get a card and a pen. So hand up for mic, there you go. Fist up for paper. No, just fire.
Hi, so a question for you, Effy. So when you're transitioning into having a roommate partner, how do you deal with the politics of bringing people home? And do you have rules about that?
Good question. We're very fortunate that we actually have a 2-bedroom apartment. And we're just fortunate that we worked out that was possible. It's not something we've had to deal with yet. The idea is that we have that second bedroom is set up to be a bedroom. And I imagine that's what we would use if needed. It's not something we're still tackling the dishes in the sink. But I think the other sort of caveat is the way that we live in the building, we have space. and which is so rare for New York living. We have downstairs, upstairs, third floor, multiple, like 2 bedrooms in our apartment, a basement downstairs. So we kind of have space, so we don't have to tackle that issue. We've had incidents before, and I think what ended up happening is the person that doesn't want to be involved in what's happening went to our guest bedroom. So it was like, this is happening. Do I want to be a part of it? Maybe a little bit. Actually, this is not what I'm going to be a part of. I'm going to go and sleep in the guest bedroom. And that's kind of how we've handled it in a kind of fluid way. But I realize that we have space. So if you don't have space, that is a conversation that you need to have with your partner. And I want to actually pass on that, maybe like volley that question to you guys. Do you live together?
We do.
Do you see people at home? Do you bring dates home?
We haven't brought dates home to spend the night unless we're together.
Sure.
However, as a policy, if we believe that a person is going to be someone that we're seeing over a period of time or recurring or turn into a relationship, then we will bring them home for dinner pretty early on to meet the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any, just again, following the question, do you have any agreements on bringing dates home solo, and then what happens? Who sleeps where?
I don't think it's gotten to the point where one of us needs to be sexiled. If I'm remembering college correctly.
Yeah.
Like Allie comes home and there's a sock on the door. But there have been moments where, like, so the shared calendar is like a poly enabler.
But in a very good way.
Yes.
I'm sure there would be legislation against shared calendars if they only knew. Because sometimes what I'll do is notice that Alex has a thing one night, and I'll be like, "Hey, do you mind if I have so-and-so over?" And we negotiate our boundaries and what we use the hell yes or no rule. And so it feels like a hell yes for both of us, then we boldly go.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I found that I oftentimes feel very guilty if I have to be away for a long time. And so if I'm going to be out of the apartment until 1 a.m. and Ryan has a partner over, that's definitely a hell yes for me.
Mm-hmm.
We figured that out pretty quickly.
If it helps you.
Fucking fair. It's fair.
Any other questions?
Hi. First of all, I would like to thank Alan, Siobhan, and G for using positive vocabulary when referring to people that you're no longer in a relationship with, that it's a very difficult thing to do. And what I would like to ask you is, like, how did you get to that point? Because I know that when we separate a romantic relationship into something else, it's very easy to fall into that negative space of, like, that relationship was no good for whatever reason. How did you get to that place to be able to comfortably use positive language?
I think part of it was learning that just because a relationship ends, it's not a failure. And having to learn that over and over again, because I would still tell myself old stories and then realize, no, everything that we have is still so worthwhile. And it's not really over, right? The story is still continuing. And I think just deeply valuing this person's presence in my life and having someone who knows me so well over such a long course of time, I didn't want to burn that bridge. So I think for me, it was just intuition from the beginning that I still want to be connected to this person. Even when things were horrible, it was like, there's still something here. So just valuing that and working towards it.
I feel like my answer is a bit more selfish. I love me and I love the decisions I've made. I wasn't crazy for 4.5 years. Like, there were good things about them. And if I step outside myself and say, and like, if I were looking at a friend's relationship, like, okay, it didn't work out, but y'all had a good thing going for a while. And I still love them. And I still they've infected all my favorite songs. And some days I'll be listening to a song that I've been listening to since I was 5 years old, but now it reminds me of them. And I'm bawling in the bottom of my shower. And like, hating them isn't going to fix that. Just because you can't be around someone for a period of time doesn't mean you love them any less. I just had to recognize that I loved myself enough to walk away from it, and it doesn't change what we had, even though we can no longer be together.
I mean, I still refer to her as my partner. It's no longer necessarily a sexual relationship, but she's still my best friend. She's still probably the most significant relationship in my life currently. We talk on the phone most days, so it's just an evolution, and thus, yeah, still love her.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah.
Hi. So this is actually for Alex. So a lot of your transition, you use the phrase that you actually fucked up, in the sense that you were kind of doing it and then realized later on that, oh, that's something that you needed to talk about. Do you feel that that was better for finding out what you wanted in a relationship, or would you have rather had talked about it beforehand and kind of figured that out later on?
Definitely talking. I don't know that I would say it was better or just more effective because, I found that outside of the monogamous construct, I have no script or understanding of how to ask for what I need. I have an understanding of like what I should need. And then that gut feeling that's like, oh, I'm attracted to this person, and I should shut that down immediately. So oftentimes I just found that I was acting out of like old beliefs and habits. Ryan and I talk a lot about social scripting and how that plays out in our relationship or in our non-monogamous relationships. But yeah, it was just a gut feeling. Like I felt like I was doing something wrong. And so I would hide it. I wouldn't communicate it because that has always been the practice in terms of monogamous relationships. You don't share that, you want to make out with your coworker or whatever. You keep that down. And so it took me a while to figure out that this was a safe place for me to talk about that. And most of the time it was because I waited until that attraction had escalated to the point that it did become a problem, because I was then hiding something from my partner, who was just like, if you told me the truth, like it might have been uncomfortable and then we would have talked about it. But like in my head, I'm like, the relationship would explode. But it doesn't. That's not what this is about.
Yeah, she good. Yeah.
To that point, what made it easier for me was like being involved in queer relationships. That playbook that everyone has was already thrown out the window. And so it's like, okay, we have to talk about what this is going to be, because like, you're not going to get me pregnant and I'm not going to have your children. And like, you are already married. So like, what does you like, it's about shaping this relationship for what it needs to be for each of you, and creating a space where you're comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And that was the red flag for me. Like when we stopped communicating just to keep the peace, that was the death knell for us. So it's about maintaining this environment of communication.
And I want to kind of add to that. I totally agree with you. And I want to add to that and give you almost like the flip side of that as well. So sometimes communication is great. It is the most important skill you can have in life, but definitely in relationships, and most importantly in non-monogamous relationships. When you're discussing your relationship and sort of coming out with your agreements and all that kind of stuff, there is a difference between what your intellectual mind thinks that is the right, what you want and what you think you want, and like that, and then there is the feeling when it's happening, right? You might have agreed on a bunch of things, on your kitchen table with your pen and paper, right? About what it's gonna, right? What it's gonna feel like. And then you have some agreements and then you actually go and do the thing and it feels awful. It feels awful for you or it feels awful for the other person. So talking is great, but at some point you kind of have to experience it and then go back to what you've discussed and refine, right? And when you're doing that, the important thing is to look at those experiences as like experiences sort of in silo and experiments, and not make it about the whole relationship. Like it's not about you broke our agreements or like our agreements don't work anymore, but like we had to go, we figured some stuff out, we went and experienced it, it didn't feel good, let's come back and refine and allow that change, the flow of change. Like we were talking about evolution, we're talking about change, allow that change to happen, and then just keep propping it up with communication revision. And I think that's important as well. Like communication is great, but like do the thing, revise as well. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Hi, how's it going? So I guess my question for actually all of you, because all of you have been in primary relationships for a very long time. I guess yourself, the longest, 11 years, and yourself also. For me, my current relationship, we've been together 12 years. Monogamous for 11, and then poly for the last year, for the past year or so. So when my partner and I started seeing each other, social media didn't really exist. Online dating didn't really exist. I think at the time, MySpace was the biggest thing. So now, getting into poly and dating, the dating game has changed. So, I only recently learned what ghosting was. I had no idea, what that was until it happened to me and I was explaining it to someone. Yeah. And so my question to you guys, for those of you that have been together for a long time, when you experience, some of these dating issues that you've never experienced before and are experiencing for the first time, did you discuss that with did you discuss that with your partners? And then, what came about that? Or did you just, I guess, keep it to yourself? I guess, what do you choose to share and what do you choose not to share? That's number one. And then, it's a two-part question. So for myself, having been going to a lot of the poly socials, so, people that either ghosted you or whatnot, you're still running into these people. At these socials. So it's like, okay, how awkward, how am I supposed to react to you now? Because mostly if you're not, in the poly scene and you date someone and it doesn't work out, the chances of you running into them, all right, New York City is a small place, maybe you do, but 9 times out of 10 you don't. But some of these people, you're seeing them constantly. And it's like, all right, you did this to me, so do I bring it up? Do I not bring it up? So how do you deal with that aspect of the relationship?
Who wants to start?
Yeah, I'll start because I've got a timely one. So, I mean, it's been interesting for me because we started dating when I was 17. She's really the only person I ever dated until we opened up our relationship I was, 25, 26. And so dealing with a lot of these things, I guess I haven't had to deal with a lot because my dating had been kind of casual up to that point. Just like a few dates, nothing that developed into any sort of capital R relationship. Although recently as I've been more on my own, I've discovered that, I have a place that I could bring people back to if I wanted to. Actually, the first night I moved into my place, I ended up having a date. Literally, she came over and I was like, I need to get my couch upright. Can you? Sorry, I don't usually put dates to manual labor, but she's like, yeah, I can get with that. The interesting thing for me is having come from this relationship that's been a primary one in my life. I have a much more of a connection between like sex and emotions than I feel like people that are maybe have dated and had not had primary relationships for that long of a time have. So I had this date, and we ended up in various states of doing things, but I didn't want to have sex. I think she was put off by that, and I realize now that I might not have made it clear about my connection between like sex and intimacy and being extremely casual and everything. I did talk to my partner, best friend, about that. In not directly, but kind of it's a thing that I've recognized is becoming. I'm just becoming more aware of. She didn't have much feedback to give or anything like that, but she's there to listen and provide that kind of emotional support in some way. I'm going to be at this woman's house on Friday for an event, so I might run into her there. I don't know. I've seen people that like I've had messages with on OkCupid or whatever, and like we talked for a little bit and then they disappeared, or maybe we had a date that was fine. And I think the general approach to that is just kind of be cordial. Oh, hey, how's it going? And just, it's clear that they don't want to talk about it. I texted her and was like, hey, like I wanted to follow up on the other night just because I feel like I didn't explain where I was at fully, and she didn't get back to me. I'm like, all right, that's fine. I think it's just be cordial, and it didn't work out clearly, and maybe there's no need to push on it for, you know, what's it gonna bring you.
Yeah, so dating for the first time after, my former partner C was my third sex partner, and I'd never really done much dating. So all of a sudden, dating for the first time at 31, like that first kiss is like, oh my God, what is this? So we actually discussed so much along the way. My first breakup, my partner bought me flowers and like comforted me about the breakup and just held space for the relationships that I was experiencing. So yeah, we talked a lot about it. Part of it is probably because we had been in couples counseling and he had trained, he's a psychologist now. And so we just talk a lot and share all those things. But I also reach out to him when I was having after our partnership ended and having a conversation with a current partner that might be shifting the relationship and being really uncertain about things. Like I absolutely go to my ex and talk to him about as much as he is willing to listen. But that's also a big piece, right? Of like, how much does he actually want to hear? How much do I want to share? And that's been a moving target along the way. But I found it very valuable to be able to share while also like learning that sometimes it's not the time and finding other outlets to share. Like learning early on as my, excited extrovert butterfly self, I like come home and I wanted to tell him everything and he didn't want to hear it. He was, like introverted, doesn't care about this like random makeout I had. So I called a friend on my walk home instead and like learning those kinds of dynamics. In terms of continuing to see people in the community, yeah, it's going to happen. And so always cordial and kind of trusting that everyone is taking care of themselves. So if this relationship ended or we had like a hard thing and then neither of us wanted to talk about it, or I could sense that this person I went on, like 2 dates with didn't want to talk about it, I was like, oh, okay, that's just not a good fit. I need the relationship to be able to like engage with those hard conversations. So, okay, that's not going to happen, but sure, we can see each other and hug and maybe kiss at a party, maybe not. Just trying not to have hard feelings and, finding someone else to talk to about it if I am really upset, not bringing it out into public.
I specifically asked my partner the other week, like, how much do you want to hear?
That's a great question to ask. I find I talk, so as a part of my job, right? So I'm also, my own relationships are a bit of a lab myself. Like I'm always like analyzing, looking at them, and I do speak to my partners about dates and many other things and about how I feel about my other relationships. What I find the most valuable thing why I do it is the feedback that I get, because sometimes you don't have that outside perspective, right? So one of my sort of favorite things is like personal development, like relationship nerd is, you can get into like a loggerheads with one partner and it's like, it ends up becoming a, you said, they said about, you're really critical. No, I'm not. You're really critical. No, I'm not. Right. When you have two partners going, you know what, you're a little critical. Right. And you're like, okay. So there's two of them and there's me and then you have I'm the common experience. So maybe I should listen. Right. So one of I think just why you want to share is and I'm just saying this, like why, like being clear about why you want to share is helpful. Right. Do you just want to download or like, what do you want out of it? And being clear about that with your partners, I think is helpful, but whether it's dates or other relationships and that kind of stuff. I do it mostly for self-reflection because it's like, I get two different feedbacks. It's like doing a survey, right? And I'm interested in the common feedback. And then in terms of bumping into people who ghost you, with the poly community in New York City are small and people date one another, this is gonna happen. You're gonna bump into people that they ghosted you, or or people that you dated, went on a couple of dates with and it didn't work out, or had a long-term relationship with, and now dating your best friend. It's just the nature of the community. I think you just learn to be cordial, and you kind of exactly all the things that G said. You're just like cordial, you're respectful, you're as close, as far from them as you like. So I would say. Anybody have anything to add?
I mean, like, before I knew I was poly, like the gay world in New York City is positively incestuous. And the more like specific your community is, the smaller that pool's gonna be. And unless you want to be downright ostracized and be like, the crazy bitch of the group, like, you just let that go. It's like, I'll wave and say hello when we see each other at a party, and if you turn around like you didn't see me, all right, then like we won't talk tonight. Like that's fine. There's plenty of a dick in the sea. When it comes to like telling your partners about other dates, like one of my partners was really into it. It's like, oh my God, Dish, tell me everything. What color was his eyes? Like, what did y'all eat for dinner? The other partner, he like, you know, it didn't upset him, but like he didn't really give a damn about the other people I was seeing because like we were into different types. And so he's like, that person sounds miserable. I don't like, did you have fun? I'm glad you had fun. But like, it's a matter of knowing your partner well enough to know how much they want to hear. And also as someone who's like, as your partner, that it's like having a best friend. Like you're going to want to tell them things and they're going to want to hear things. And like, you play with how much of that is allowed for the two of you.
And sometimes it could also be, I think this is what you were talking to Alex, is like, but if you leave it too late, by the time you're talking about it, you're kind of dropping a bombshell. Like when you're like, oh, I met this person and there was a connection, it's much easier to talk about than like 3 months later. I mean, like, I met this person, there was a question, there was a connection, we went on, 3 dates, we've had a sleepover, I think I'm in love, here you go. And you're like, whoa, where does that come from, right? Like that comes from nowhere. And then that's way more like, feels so much more bigger than like this sort of drip, like communicate with the change, right? So I met somebody, there was a connection. I think I might, ask them out for a date. You're not asking for permission as such, but you're just like communicating the change, right? So by the time you're saying, I think I love this person, your partner that you're talking to isn't like in shock and like doesn't know what they're doing and like feeling really unsafe and insecure, all that kind of stuff. So like that drip conversation, if it makes sense within your relationship, of course you can agree with your partner to have a don't ask, don't tell, or whatever you've agreed to is that's what you should go by. If you're thinking about like best practice, that would be kind of my suggestion.
I want to add one thing about getting ghosted. As an expert on the subject, no. Well, I have a headless kink profile on OkCupid, and about half the people I match with are like, "Ooh, kink, what is that?" I'm actually terrified. And when that happens, my number one coping mechanism is to complain to Alex about it. And to her credit, she's always like, "That person's stupid." And I'm like, "You're right. I feel better." However, what I noticed, when I made my debut into the dating world after a previous long-term relationship that was not ideal for a couple of reasons, I noticed that I got attached to other people ghosting me when I felt that I hadn't accurately portrayed who I am. And I got attached to that rejection because I was critical of how I had behaved myself. And so when I think a lot about being integral both in communication, in interaction, and living my poly life and my dating life and my kink life according to my values, so that when someone else ghosts me, I can say with a straight face to myself that there are a lot of reasons to suffer. The Buddhist suffering, right? Life is suffering. I cannot possibly understand or predict what's going on for another person, but I can be compassionate to whatever thing was happening for them that made them want to avoid a deeply unpleasant conversation, even if that conversation consists of, "Hey, not feeling it, you're great." I don't want to imply that everyone that I go on a date with has this deep existential moment of suffering, right? Because that's not exactly how I want to market myself in the world, but I do try to have more, present evidence not excluded. I do try to take a little bit more of a global perspective on you never know what these people are dealing with, and that is a really good excuse for me to be cordial and be kind when I see someone else in the world. Now, when I behave out of integrity with my own values or do something stupid, that's when I'm like, please don't reject me. I was just being stupid. I'm sorry. And that's when, I thought about this because you said that text message, right, you said, I think I need to explain this a little better. And whenever I've never gotten a response to that text message, but I've sent it multiple times because that's an integrity thing for me, you know?
Sure, just one more thing about communication. Ryan and I found that in the beginning, we were so thrilled and excited. It was like Christmas morning. We wanted to talk about poly all the time. And so we were talking about OkCupid. We were sending each other screenshots, et cetera, et cetera. And then we were sometimes doing that in the middle of the workday, sort of just gliding past the fact that some of these conversations might be emotionally fraught for the other person. And you have no idea when you're going to cross that boundary, but you might have just derailed the other person's entire afternoon. And now you have to have a 2-hour conversation to pick that apart. And we oftentimes were working from home together at the same time, like, individually on OkCupid in different rooms and then running into the other room. So essentially, we very quickly realized that we needed a container for those conversations. And we literally use that phrase, hey, can I open the container right now? Is now a good time? Because one, I have the attention span of a gnat fly, and Ryan might bring up something that like requires my attention. He needs my attention, and I need to be in a place where I can devote that attention to him, and be prepared that it might be a longer conversation. So I've found that really, really helpful, because I can often say like, no, I don't want to talk about that right now. I gotta like take a nap or something. Can we talk about this in 2 hours, and then I'll be ready.
That's really good. And I'll add to that in a little bit, is just talking about poly all the time. That does happen, and like find other things to talk about to like ease it up. Sometimes, especially because you do have to talk about the relationship conversations, like it happens especially when you're setting things up at the beginning. And if you have multiple relationships, what you end up sometimes is in just that's what all you think about, and that's just what's occupying your mind, and that's exhausting. That's exhausting mentally. That's exhausting emotionally. So like, find a hobby, start doing something else, and just don't make your whole life, your relationship, your identity, how you spend your time, mental energy, effort, just relationships. And this is coming from a relationship coach. So I'm telling you, just watch out for that. And also connect over other things, connect over cooking, connect over your friends, connect over other things, as well as this, poly relationship that you're nurturing as well, I would say. There's another question over there.
So it sounds like most of you have been in pretty long-term, serious partnerships. I'm curious if you've ever had moments where one of your new partners does something or says something, or just their existence triggers your existing partners in a way that makes it really hard to, like, where you almost have to force a choice between your current partner and the new partner, or where it could be that, like, in navigating the presence of a new partner, especially if you're early in this existing relationship, you can end up hitting some snags where you say or do things that make for problems in the primary dynamic. How have you navigated that? What would you recommend? Basically, what happens when you trigger your partner with the existence of other people, and does it force the end of one of the two relationships?
So like I said, this was my first poly relationship when I jumped in head first and was like, all right, screw it, we're doing it, screw your feet, let's get our neck wet. And for a minute, and I don't know how to swim, so I wasn't even treading water. I was drowning for a minute there. I didn't understand what I was getting myself into, and one of my other partners had been around longer than I had, but for whatever reason did not choose to live with them. And we had to figure out what we meant to each other and how we were going to be around each other, because I had this lofty idea in my head, well, it's poly, so we're all going to love each other and live on this big hippie commune and everything's going to be perfect. And they were like, no, you're cool and all, but I don't want to date you, and I don't necessarily want to be around you very often. And I was just like, what? Now we're best friends, but at the time I was just like, I don't know if any of this is gonna work. If they can't love me, then they're gonna taint your idea of me, and then this is all for naught. Why are we here? But it really you have to circle around back and say, wait. Is this is this a we problem or is this a me problem? And if it's a me problem, then, okay, take some time, self-reflect, come back a new person and see how you feel again. And one of the nuggets my partner gave me when we were together was whenever a new person comes into a relationship, you're not adding a person to the relationship. That old relationship dies. And the 3, 4, 5 of you are starting something new together. Your past is still there. Your past is still important. But in order to create something that's sustainable, you can't say, oh, well, we're watching Doctor Who because it's Tuesday night and we always watch Doctor Who on Tuesday night. You don't have, you either love it or shove it. Like it's about making that space for one another, making that space for, dealing with moving in with one partner and it's like, I don't like the way you leave your toothbrush on the sink covered in toothpaste. You're gross. Like double that. Or triple that. And so it's really about, owning what's your problem and then working through what's our problem.
So I misspoke before. I did have one relationship in this time that I've been with my partner that was a bit more significant. And that was probably that was definitely the most challenging one. In that my partner, best friend, values time spent together very highly, and so there were some points of there were some struggles when the three of us were actually together because this partner that not my best friend, this other partner lived out of state, so she would come and visit occasionally, and I think that dynamic not quite working well, and the challenges with time spent actually end up being one of the things that caused that long distance relationship to end. That being said, with this new evolution of my current relationship into some, me being dating more as solo poly, but still having this, intense emotional relationship with my best friend. I can't say I'm specifically looking forward to figuring out all the things if I should come into another strong emotional relationship, because I'm certainly open to that. We've discussed that theoretically that would be fine for me to move on to, but I am aware that is going to be a challenge.
You don't have to. It seemed that you had something to add. I wanted to make sure you have some.
I feel like Ryan believes I have something to contribute here. Not to I'm sorry to speak for you. Yeah, I think it's a great and it's an important question and it's something to think about. And I feel like we have each been on both sides of that equation. Initially, I was seeing a man, and romantically things escalated. It was like the first guy that I went out with, once we'd opened up, it got fairly emotionally involved very, very quickly. And Ryan and I had agreed on physical boundaries for each date. We would discuss it at length. And then, that's like in theory, as you were saying earlier, versus in practice. And then I would come home from that date and we'd have a lot of really, like, I could see that Ryan was in pain, that it was really, really challenging. And I thought throughout, well, I didn't do anything wrong because I did all the things. In fact, I did less. Like, we only kissed once, It took that happening over and over and over and seeing, I think for a while too, I just thought well, this has to do with this is Ryan's side of the street. Not that maybe we need to rethink the way that we're approaching this because you're the person that I love and you're in a lot of pain, and maybe just the logistical sort of physical boundaries are not enough. Ryan talked about consensual versus non-consensual poly. when Ryan started seeing someone who he was emotionally involved with, very quickly, who he could see, becoming a secondary partner, I experienced a lot of that pain and thought, felt like I was dying. And we realized really quickly that we were moving way, way too fast. In fact, like everything that we'd ever learned dating monogamously, often those things did not apply. So we needed to establish proper boundaries, which were like no texting every day in the beginning, because that pulls us away from each other. Like space that out. Don't get super stoned off of each other's pheromones. Like wait. See each other once, wait another 2 weeks, then go out on another date. And like when Ryan met someone who was like really, really lovely and was like willing and generous enough to step back and slow it down. What I think a friend of mine said, it was like, if the relationship ended with that person, it was like they'd be crashing, driving 17 miles per hour versus 70. So we decided to take it very, very slowly and found that physical boundaries weren't enough. If the other person was in pain and it was not a hell yes, we needed to reconsider our approach. Does that?
Yeah. Just to respond specifically to the language you used, you were using the word trigger, and I think that means different things to different people. For me, I have a lot of baggage behind my chair. No, I have a lot of baggage in my past about abandonment and inadequacy stuff, and that's like perfect storm in Polyland. And I think this speaks directly to what you said about me versus we, because I've been to just enough therapy to understand my problems but not fix them. I decided that it was all a me problem, and so I didn't have the tools to stand up for the fact that I thought there was something about our relationship that was creating this unnecessary amount of pain. It took me getting involved in a romantic relationship and Alec experiencing that same suffering for us to realize that we were doing something wrong. So I think the most succinct version of our answer is like, if it feels like it's forcing a decision point for you, then there might be structural flaws in your approach. And that's not going to be true all the time, because there are people who have had to make hard relationship choices. When we started getting close to the bandsaw, we realized it wasn't because we needed to make that choice, but because we had set up the systems the wrong way, if that makes sense.
Their right way might not necessarily be your right way. You just gotta play with it.
This is this is the whole relationship by design idea is like you have to figure out your own design. You have to go through the process and figure out what's right for you. Yeah.
So I have a question. We've been talking a lot about, like, say your nesting partner or your primary partner, or the person that you are opening up this partnership with, and how you make it work with them, and being sensitive to each other's emotions and things. But I feel like there's a lack in talking about maybe the other people that you're bringing into this fold of your whatever your structure is. And I find that, like, my partner and I, we date together, as well as like with the possibility of like offshoots, if there's like only a connection between like a couple of the other people, and like totally like there's no reason to stop like a beautiful relationship. But I find that especially people who are trying to understand polyamory and who are monogamous, and they're like, oh, like, how is this affecting your relationship? And like, isn't this thing like tearing you apart, and jealousy, blah, blah, blah. But they never think about the other people. And I think the other people, as in terms of like coming into something, that is pre-existing, have the harder, just, yeah, or sure. But just they have like, they have maybe not harder, or just as difficult of like a thing to deal with. And so, there was this one instance where somebody was like, oh, like we wanted to progress to being more intimate. And she was like, oh, well, like really like my partner wants to meet you first. And to me, it was like, fuck you. I'm not dating your partner. Like, cool. Like I want to respect these boundaries, but also like, this is our relationship, and your partner like is of course like something that is in, your other realm, but the fact that it's like invading this is kind of almost not seeing me as an individual person, And so like we try to like be very mindful of that, because also like people coming into like a pre-existing thing is like it's like if you ever move to a different like school and you get into a group of friends that already have like a history and they'll have their jokes and stuff, and you're like, I really want to like, I wish I knew all your inside jokes, but you don't, and so you feel like a lesser friend. I feel like that's like something that everybody can like, I don't know, empathize with. And I've been talking a lot, sorry, but anyway, I want to hear your thoughts on like, seeing these other people as people. And I feel like putting boundaries on like how often you can text somebody is almost not seeing them as necessarily like even the possibility of them being like a true partner, not letting that flourish. I don't know. Thoughts?
I appreciate the question. It's bringing up a few different situations for me that I wanted to share. And this is also coming from the perspective of someone who values kitchen table poly and non-hierarchical poly. So even when I was with the nesting partner, we were aiming towards non-hierarchical, which was actually quite difficult to do for us when we were nesting. So just all of that is context. But I have found in new relationships, especially when they have existing partners, I ask, okay, what are our boundaries? Where are spaces where this relationship cannot go? Because I need to know that early on before my heart is on the table. So one of my new lovers has a nesting partner, and I didn't know what that would mean for the depth that we can go. And I learned where they're at, but it actually doesn't impact the depth. So I am willing to go forward, but I have to ask and find that out first. I had the situation of when my ex-husband and I were living together, and I started a new relationship with someone that 3.5 years later I'm still with. But at the time he was nesting with someone, and I was one of several partners he had, and I felt very secondary, tertiary, had to deal with a lot of pain in that process, and was scared to talk about it for a long time because I was still new and didn't know what was up. But I hear you and really want to make sure that we value all of our people, regardless of how long we have been with them, what our titles and labels are. But we're all people and in this connection space together.
I love people, but I love myself the most. And I was diplomatic, but I was very stern very early on. I said, look, I love you, I want you, but I don't need you. And if you're not going to treat me like you want me here, then I can go do other things. And a transition for me was going from being this outsider coming in to being the insider bringing in other outsiders. And like, someone mentioned to me the campfire rule, which I value very much, leave the space better than when you found it. And so especially I call myself the gateway drug of poly. Like I keep coming across these people who are monogamous and like we're friends, and they're like, I've never done this poly thing, but you seem pretty cool. Let's try this out. And I'm like, okay, kid gloves. All right, what does poly mean to you? Okay, what it would like, how involved do you want to be? And like I'm very much about making the new partner welcome. Like, like I was saying before, your old relationship is dead. And the relationship now is whoever was involved before and this other person, not plus this other person. And it's because if you don't make that person feel included, if you don't respect that person's boundaries and desires, then they're not going to stick around long. And so you're just going to have a string of these short-term partners who all wind up feeling like you used them. And so it's pay attention to people, pay attention to their needs. And like, your partner is always going to be like, I mean, structurally speaking, like, you know, if y'all pay a mortgage together, like, there are going to be some things that, you know, you have to refer to your partner for that you don't have to refer to your boyfriend for. But it's about making sure that, you know, that boyfriend still feels important, that boyfriend still feels loved, that boyfriend still feels like his opinion matters.
Yeah, I think I also want to add, I've actually been that I've moved away from primary and secondary language in my practice. If I'm dealing with a couple who are sort of looking at outside relationships, I talk about core relationship and auxiliary relationships, because I feel like the primary, secondary has its connotations, and you know, the words that we use affect our behavior. So I understand the definition that they want to have, but because of the value in the human that you're dating, that's why I've moved away. Now we talk about core relationship and auxiliary relationships, and I've been that auxiliary relationship for my longest poly relationship is they're now married and I'm the third person, and I have a very clear idea of what I want as an auxiliary partner. And so I, like what G said, I check in with like, what is your relationship? What's available, right? And I think like if I match that availability, do I have my needs met and my expectations met, all that kind of stuff. And I think if you are the part of the core couple and you're dating, I think you do need to explain that to the people that you're dating. And I think again, then they have the choice of, you know, if you're saying, I need to check in with my partner every time we schedule a date. You know, I need to, you know, we have a thing about taking things really slowly. Like those are the things that need to be discussed up front so that you can value those people, I think. And I think, you know, then the people that you're dating they know what they're getting themselves into. And I think that's really important. That's the best thing. And as the person who are dating, you also need to know what you need and be able to say no to a relationship. It's not available. Like a lot of the time I hear people in pain saying, I just want more from this partner, but they don't have, you know, they have this other partner or they have other partners or they have restrictions. You know, it might not be right for you because it's just the availability that you need is not there. So it's worth thinking about. We're running out of time. There's always more questions than we have time for.
So just because the event is almost over doesn't mean the conversation has to be over. We have lots of ways that we want you to connect with us. So if you see there are signs everywhere, we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, we are recording this, so there's a podcast, we are on Patreon, where if you, depending on the level, you'll be able to ask us specific questions and do Google Hangouts or get videos with your specific answers. And so there are a lot of ways that if you didn't get to ask a question today, if something comes up later, if you and your partners have conversations and something gets triggered, there are a lot of ways for you to continue to be engaged in this community outside of the events that happen monthly.
You're awesome. Thank you. Thank you. This is perfect because I have some thank yous before we wrap up this particular part of our event. So before we sort of wrap up, there are some thank yous. First and foremost, my panelists, thank you so much. You know, thank you. Curious Folks is about this. You know, it's not about us. We just put chairs out and send out Facebook invites. It is about this, and we talk about how people bravely share, and that's what they do. They come and bravely share their experiences and answer all the questions. So thank you so much for doing that. Appreciate that. And there's some personal thank yous. You just heard from Jackie. She's awesome. Jackie's my collaborator, my very new collaborator at Curious Fox. I've been doing this for 2.5 years. Jackie joined about a month ago, and life has changed in a good way. So she's now an integral part of Curious Fox organization, community. Even the Foxes who know us say hi to her here, and I am very grateful for what she's doing. Thank you very much. I also want to thank my assistant Laura, who's at the back typing away, also made it happen. Thank you, Laura. I want to thank Thomas, who's doing the recording in his own time, so I really appreciate that. A quick thank you to Levi, who spent a lot of time with me, advising me on podcast stuff. WeAreCuriousFoxes.com is our website. I mean, our social media handles on Facebook and Instagram are the same. And same with Patreon. We are Curious Foxes on Patreon. This is something that we recently set up.
The goal is that we, again, keep hearing from folks that maybe they can't make it into the room, or they're not in New York, or they're somewhere else, or I want to share this with a friend. And so we want to make this information and this community accessible as much as possible and get engagement as much as possible. And so with Patreon, there's going to be different ways in which you can engage and support the work that we're doing. This is not a lucrative experience. This is just right. This is us really just caring about this work, and so doing it. And so all the money that you give via any of the platforms really just helps us continue to do this and expand this and do more topics and more events, etc. So
yeah, and we love you, and thank you for being here.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.